Hey everybody, today we will be doing the Order Tome explanation and tier list video updated for the Archon Prophecy expansion. Now in these videos what we do is we go through every single tome and we explain the advantages, the disadvantages, we go over units if they're applicable, and we just generally give you ideas as to what a tome does well, what it doesn't do well, and then we rank it overall into how good it's doing. Somebody asked me in my Materium Tome video, are you ranking these tomes against all tomes or generally against themselves? And the answer is kind of both. I can't really give you a great example. A lot of this is just played on the vibes, so to speak. And really, these videos are made more so just to I always describe it as a nerd podcast, but in a lot of ways it's to kind of give you ideas as to what to go, what to choose, give you general ideas. Like this one just generally doesn't do a lot, and this one generally does a lot, but there are some builds that are obviously very powerful using tomes that aren't the greatest, and there's some tomes that are the greatest that just simply don't work even in the strongest build. So it's good to generally know what's going on with all of that. Now, as I do in all my intros, I do take a bit too long, but what I do want to talk about here is I thought I'd already done a couple of updated tome tier lists. I realized I only did Materium. It's hard to keep track of like what I planned for and then what I actually did. Sometimes it's a bit confusing, but you just got to go with me on that. So I'm probably gonna have to do a few of these videos. Nature and Chaos I'm definitely gonna leave until the next expansion, because I just get the feeling that they're gonna get a bit more updates there that'll make them a bit more applicable. Nature definitely has gotten a few updates, and I should probably do a video on that, but what I don't want to do is get into the habit of every 4 months we do an updated tier list, and I really feel like that would happen if I did Nature. So what we're probably gonna do, Materium was so horribly out of date, I really had to do that. So that leaves Order and likely Shadow we're gonna do. Astral hasn't seen the most updates, but it has seen some updates. So what I'll probably do, if we assume expansions are every 4 months, we'll probably do Astral, Nature, Chaos next expansion. We'll do Order, Shadow, Materium this expansion. Last expansion, I should have done Materium. I only realized how laughably out of date it was when somebody left a comment on my videos, which I do read, by the way. I read everybody's comments. And someone was like, this video is really out of date. And I was like, yeah, actually, it really is. So, okay, at the end of the video, I will have the tier list. You can go check the end of the video. Everybody who wanted to do that has already probably clicked over to the end of the video. But for those of you who are a bit more patient and actually kind of pay attention to the video, well, here we go. It's just going to be podcast style. We're going to go over every single tome. So as always, make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, make sure to leave a comment down below. All these things help me immensely and help my channel grow a lot. Even when you guys watch non-AoW4 videos, which do seem to be the more popular ones, obviously, but you know, it helps me a lot. So I have the tier list on my right. I do, like, sometimes it's hard for me to be like, okay, well, this tome's like an A or an S, and I think to myself, like, well, what did I write down? And I kind of like sticking to what I wrote down, because at the end of the day, it's not that important. What's important is knowing whether or not it's strong, right? Because just because I put something in B doesn't mean it gets like a tier list B, D powered. It's like, no, it's weaker now because some YouTubers said it's in B tier, you know what I mean? Okay, so let's talk about Tome of Faith. First off, this is the first time we talk about large updates to Order tomes in this expansion. So Tome of Faith has received a very large update, and if I do forget updates that happen to tomes, I don't want this to be here's an update on the tome video, right? Like I did a video on that if you want to go see what updated to Order. Otherwise, I want this video to be as applicable for as long a time as possible. So if I spend a lot of time talking about changes on tomes, then it's not good. Like people are gonna be like, okay, well, I started playing after that expansion, so I don't really need to know all the different changes that happen because I don't even care, right? So anyway, that's why I won't go over every change, but the really big ones we will go over. Tome of Faith got the Summon Lesser Light Spirit. This makes it a tome that you can pick first because you now have a strong summon. This summon does a little bit of damage. It did get nerfed really hard first in the beta, then it got nerfed again. Its regular Light Spirit got nerfed really hard, and it does a bit of damage, but it's mostly usable because it's just a support unit you can summon. It's got a heal. The heal can remove status effects, and generally speaking, it's just a decently strong summon. It gets all the Battle Mage enchantment. If you're going with like a Battle Mage route, this is actually kind of like a weirdly good Battle Mage unit to summon in the early game, because it does good damage and it heals, so it's good for helping you clear the map and all that. After that, we have the Abbey. Now, we do need to talk about one thing in the Abbey. I should have gone over this first. What kind of helps Tome of Faith be pretty strong here is when we look at the I forget what it's actually called specifically, the School of Cryomancy and the Soul Well. So we look at these, right? Soul Well, this is a research SPI, which are generally the strongest SPIs. SPI stands for single, what is it stand for? Special Performance Improvement, there we go. Generally, the research ones will be cost at 250 production, as if they're a tier 2. That's because they are pretty strong, and it's a good idea to make them cost stronger, so they're not just, if it's a research SPI, it's the best, because knowledge is the best resource, period, in the game. And so research special performance improvements are cost more to make up for that. But unfortunately for the developers, I think they kind of skipped one, and the Abbey over here from the Tome of Faith actually is only 130 production. So, as you might imagine, this gives it a little bit of an advantage, not like, oh my god, this breaks Tome of Faith. Like, even if they nerfed it, it wouldn't be that big a deal. It would only be a 120 production increase, but in the early game, that can kind of help. So we have a pretty strong research SPI here. 10 knowledge makes it just as good as the School of Cryomancy if you're not playing in ice. And you can slap it next to like 2 farms, get 6 extra knowledge from that, so it can generate some extra there. It's got a little bit of a use here. It's not that good. I don't think I've ever actually used it. It can be helpful for sure. I don't know. Now, if we look into the tome itself, Tome of Faith before this expansion was considered quite bad. That's because it had a lot of things that nobody really cared about, such as Faithful Whispers. Allegiance with target-free city increases faster. Great, cool. Vassals are not really that strong. They might be buffed in the future with the Order Affinity track rework that hopefully comes out next expansion this time. Order does do a lot of buffs to vassals, so if those affinity track buffs get buffed to where they should be, so like maybe instead of 10 gold it's 20, maybe instead of 10% income, it goes like all the way to like 30, 40, 50% more income. In that world, Faithful Whispers might be strong. For now, it's not really that good. That's a good segue into one thing I'm going to talk about. Order tomes are really, really, really strong. But the reason people don't just do pure order builds all the time is the Order Affinity track is quite weak. So despite Astral tomes on average being weaker than Order tomes, Astral tomes are picked more generally because their Affinity track is just that much stronger. So once the Affinity track gets reworked, I'm kind of ignoring the Affinity track. That's one reason that I kind of try to compare these tomes against themselves, is because the Affinity track plays a lot into this. If we looked at the Affinity track, every Order tome, despite being like on here for power, I'd put it like down here in the tier list, right? And every Astral tome, despite being like down on power, would be like up here in power because of just Astral Affinity. So that's just one thing to consider. Okay. So we've got a very strong research SPI, a very strong summon, a worthless spell. Wrath of the Faithful is, oof, this one's weird. It kind of comes into the game at an odd time. It is a good spell. I think it is a very good spell, but the problem is you don't really have any Faithful units yet. Faithful units are for later in the game. I don't actually know. Is Light Spirit Faithful? I think, is Light Spirit Lesser Light Spirit? You aren't Faithful. Yeah, it's kind of hard to get Faithful units this early in the game. So Wrath of the Faithful tends to just be 10 damage. Later in the game, that stacks up pretty quickly to 50 damage if you have a full army of Faithful units. So it is a decent spell for just nuking enemies. But it's kind of weird because right now you can get Faithful on your support units with Staves of Mending. So you can maybe get like 2-3 Light Spirits in a stack. Maybe you go 3 Light Spirits, 2 Heroes, and something, right? And you can bring this up to 25 damage, which would make it a pretty good spell. But if we compared this to example, over here, just Necrotize. Necrotize does 20 damage just for existing, and gives Decaying, and gives you a Decaying Zombie, and costs the exact same. So when we look at it from that perspective, it's like, yeah, it's fine. Like, it's It's not bad, but it's just like it takes a while to get going, and then by the time it does get going, you're kind of like, weirdly, like in the late game, once you would have 8 faithful units in a battle, so you've got like 2 stacks fighting, once you get to that point, you don't really want to be using early game spells anymore. So it's like fine, but it's not what's the phrase I always use? It's not blowing my mind. It's fine. Staves of Mending is pretty good. This gives all your support units faithful, which gives a lot of synergy, as you just saw, with orders, spells, tomes, etc., and reduces its upkeep, which helps a lot. So if you would have lesser light spirits, and maybe you're doing an elemental build, so you would have lesser light spirits, and then you would maybe have the druid shepherd ambition, you could reduce that upkeep by 20, then you could reduce it by 10% more, so you could get these guys down to a pretty low upkeep. And if you have Mending Touch, which you will always get, that's a free heal for 15 as a free action. This also synergizes with any of those support, Tome of Warding, Tome of Prosperity, those tomes that buff support units to do another effect on their spells, their abilities, I should say. So you could have a Mending Touch that gives bolster resistance or another grace. So this actually does scale pretty well. I would say that this is definitely stronger than Tome of Alchemy's support buff. Probably, yeah. And generally, I think Staves of Mending is just really good. Army Heal is complicated, but I would say it's overall good. It's one of these spells that, like, I wouldn't go a tome for it, but once I did have a tome for it, I would probably use it. In an ideal world, we can maybe grab Lesser Light Spirit, Staves of Mending, Army Heal, Convent, I always call it Convent, and then move on to our next tome. Maybe we'd do Wrath of the Faithful instead of Army Heal. It really depends. I would never go Faithful Whispers. One of the things people often forget when they're looking at spells like Faithful Whispers is you have a limited tech tree. Tomes are your tech tree. Once you get 4, you move on to the next one, right? And so I think it's 4. It should be 4. I always forget this because every time I think it's 4, I think, wait, is it 3? No, it's 4. And then I second guess myself until I gaslight myself out of remembering it properly. But at any rate, if you go back for spells like this, you're skipping on to your next tome. So you could maybe end up in a situation where you don't get something better. Tome of Faith does have the advantage that all 5 of these are fine pickups. Even Wrath of the Faithful is fine if you're clearing the map. I believe if you're auto-battling, it should like using Wrath of the Faithful. I think I would have to double check that one, but I believe I've heard that at the very least. A lot of Age of Wonders 4 is things you've heard because it's impossible to play everything all the time and keep up with every patch. So sometimes you just have to hear things from other people and believe it, right? So, as I did just mention, you will end up with some tomes that maybe have like 2 things that you want. So then you need to fill the next 2 research slots with things that are good, maybe from other tomes. So it's good to have a tome like Tome of Faith that has 5 decent enough things that you'd want. So Army Heal, I would say, is pretty good. It helps you clear the map. It helps you keep your army healed up. If bad battles happen or anything, you could just be like, poof, healed to full, right? This can also let you take maybe 2 or 3 multiple difficult fights in a turn by healing between them. So Army Heal, I wouldn't go a tome for it, but if I did have it, I would use it. Convent is, of course, pretty good. For each city stability level above unstable, you get 5 knowledge, 5 mana. If you're just a regular city in between, you get 5 knowledge, 5 mana. If you've probably built the bathhouse, you're up to 10 knowledge, 10 mana. At that, the convent starts becoming pretty good. If you go with more ordered tomes or more stability or find other ways to get stability, it can be 15 knowledge, 15 mana. That's pretty good. Now, I do think mana is less useful than gold, but Material Refinery, which is already considered a pretty good building, gives you 5 knowledge, 5 gold, up to 10 knowledge, 10 gold if you have a magic material. You'll unlikely ever have 2, but it has happened. So I would say on average, a convent is about as strong, but probably stronger than the Material Refinery. Gold is generally going to be more useful, but I would say the convent is just generally going to be more applicable to more situations because more cities can just use it, right? Not to say it's just always better in every situation, just I would say it's generally more applicable. So as we compare to our Tome of Alchemy, Tome of Faith has come in and actually been a pretty solid tome choice. Now you can combine the 2 tomes for sure, which a lot of people do. The research SPI issue does kind of end up being a pretty big issue. Overall, I would say Tome of Faith has been brought up to S tier, not applicable in every single build, but definitely very strong when it does work. Tome of Zeal, I would also say is S tier, but Tome of Zeal, as I did mention, is a tome that often doesn't work in the best builds in the game. What do you mean, you could be saying? What do you mean it doesn't work in the best builds in the game? So its most powerful aspect is Legion of Zeal, which gives Zeal. Zeal is a pretty good buff here. It gives 2 spirit damage and 10% more damage against condemned units. That's basically a blade enchantment from any of the other tomes, but in addition to affecting all melee units, it also affects ranged units. And in addition to that, it has a secondary effect where if you use it on a skirmisher, the skirmisher will get that buff on their ranged attack. So for example, if we go astral and we look here, lightning blades only affects melee attacks. So you might be thinking to yourself, okay, well, that's crazy. That's insane. Tome of Zeal, it's one of the best tomes in the game. It gives one of the best enchantments. Well, let's talk about that for a second. First off, we have the Inquisitor. You noticed I mentioned skirmishers, so let's mention the Inquisitor. He already has Zeal. Zeal doesn't stack. You can only have Zeal once. So if you're going to do an Inquisitor build, you ironically can't go Tome of Zeal. Funny, that one. The next one is Pyre Templar. Similar issue. Same issue, in fact. Literally the same issue. He already has Zeal. So, sorry if my throat is a little bit sore. Try to drink a bunch of water before doing this video, but I can hear myself getting a little bit hoarse. I don't know what's going on. I think I just have a sore throat or something. But Pyre Templar, same issue. Zeal doesn't stack. So you can't go Tome of Zeal if you're doing Inquisitors. You can't go Tome of Zeal if you're doing Pyre Templars. S-tier tome doesn't work in 2 of the best builds in the game. There's one last problem here, Exemplar. Although it's certainly not in any of the best builds in the game, Exemplar, as you just see here, also is Zeal. So one of the best things shield units can do is get Zeal, because it's really easy for them to just sit there and whack away at people and get good damage with Tome of Zeal. But wait, your late game literally can't have Zeal, so it's very awkward. So Tome of Zeal, despite being an extraordinarily powerful tome, unfortunately, doesn't work in every build. That's just something to consider. Now, why do I consider it S tier otherwise? Okay. So I'm trying to make sure I don't sound too hoarse. So here we have the Circle of Zealotry, which gives us 10 draft per positive or negative level alignment. You should always be at full positive or full negative unless you're playing high, who likes to sit right in the middle. So that will be early game, probably 10 draft automatically, and then 20, and then 30. 30 draft for SPI is pretty good. You also get a little bit of city stability. Fanatical Workforce for a mere 45 mana gives you negative 20 food and 60 production. That's a really, really good trade as compared to the Tome of Materiums. What is that one called? Tome of Materials, Awakened Tools, which often drives your city into a negative alignment level. Sorry, not alignment, stability level, which just offsets the advantage of Awakened Tools anyway. Once we start looking into the Fanatical Workforce, the negative 20 food income is pretty ignorable. You can use this bonus production to just shoot right out a 20 food building if you want, or you can use it to just shoot up to the higher tiers of buildings to build the better buildings. And then later on, you can go back and build the food buildings and just use that anyway. It's just a really strong spell here, much stronger than the Materium one, and just generally outright amazing for building up your capital and building up your first, secondary, and third cities to actually get them going. Condemnation is a pretty powerful spell, coming in here with a mere 5 mana cost, making it pretty spammable. Deals 15 spirit damage, so I mean, if you see here, compare Wrath of the Faithful to Condemnation, and you can see the clear power differences. They become condemned, which gives them -3 status resist, allowing you to automatically hit any of those effects. You have an effect that has like 90% chance to succeed on tier 1 units. Tier 1 units will have no status resist, -3, you have an automatic chance to succeed. So condemned is strong, spirit damage is strong, and then of course if you have Legion of Zeal, all these units here will get 10% more damage against the target. Makes this pretty good for clearing out early wonders, makes it just generally pretty good at a lot of different effects. Now, I guess I forgot to mention here, Summon Zealot. Zealot, you will always start the game with Summon Zealot. It is an automatically unlocked spell, whereas some other tomes will have randomness or will not choose their summon. Tome of Zeal will always start you with Zealot unlocked on turn 1. That's pretty strong. I mean, you have no randomness, you have nothing, so it's pretty good. Zealot, unfortunately, does have Zeal, which means he doesn't actually synergize well with Legion of Zeal, but it does mean if you spam him out before Legion of Zeal, he gets a lot of damage. He himself has a chance to condemn enemies, giving him, if you have 2 or 3 of them in your armies, a high chance to condemn enemies, letting you bring down world map enemies that are a high tier, lets you just focus fire, and it just generally means a zealot does a lot of damage. Overall, just a pretty strong unit. 60 HP, a mere 60 HP does actually still put him in a pretty good territory because he does get full racial traits, which makes him way stronger than any summons in the game, generally speaking. All the other spirits will generally have like 45 to 50 HP. I think only the stone spirit gets to 60 HP. So he's tankier than the other spirits, despite not actually seeming that tanky. 2 defense, 2 resist. This does actually make him a pretty tanky fighter unit. Overall, just a good dude. Although his damage, once you do get Legion of Zeal, an average fighter, a tier 1 fighter would have 14 damage, he will only have 13. He kind of makes up for that by condemning enemies automatically, but he has no other special effects, so he's just a generally beat stick. He just beats enemies down, right? So we've got a good spell here for battle, a good summon for early game, a really good spell for the economy, for setting up your cities, a very strong research SPI, sorry, why did I say research SPI? Very strong draft SPI, the other good SPI. I think draft and research are the best two. A good draft SPI for the late game, a very powerful enchantment, which unfortunately doesn't work in the best builds that would otherwise use it, which is kind of ironic, and of course, inspiring chant. Now, Inspiring Chant has been nerfed a little bit, but it is still an AoE 2 strengthened and 10 morale. What's especially worth noting is that Legion of Zeal works on range units, so this helps you. Your early game stack will generally have 1, maybe 2 range units, so this does help them stay relevant. Otherwise, if you go with other tomes, you'll generally go with blade enchantments, and those range units will start falling off and not really dealing the most damage if you do keep them alive. So Legion of Zeal helps you out, and Inspiring Chant gives you AoE morale, AoE 2 strengthened, which does cost a lot of mana, but if you do end up in some early Empire Wars or PvP Wars, anything like that, Inspiring Chant is very, very powerful for helping you win that, getting you to high morale pretty quickly, and of course AoE 2 strengthened is pretty good. Later in the game it falls off because strengthened kind of becomes ironically really easy to obtain, and there's just much better spells to do. But early in the game, doing, for example, 2 Inspiring Chants in a row at the start of the battle can just win you the battle. Okay, Tome of Zeal, S tier. Tome of Discipline, I think in the past I rated it C tier. I'm going to go Tome of Discipline actually a B tier tome right now, and that's because there's been a lot more uses found for it. It's fine. I think if Order Affinity was better, it would generally be considered better. Its big issue is that it has a conduit SPI. Conduit SPIs are just, there's so many of them, and they're just generally not that usable. But the Monastery is generally one of the better ones, giving you 10 city stability, 10 draft. This allows you to prolong from having to build a bathhouse. Bathhouses are pretty big expenditures. The Monastery is not really that expensive. You can slap it next to 2 farms. That's 14 stability, that's 16 draft. That's pretty good for getting in the early game. It's also a conduit, so you have to factor in that it's a conduit. But what we have over here is they have been nerfed a little bit, but you have, I would say, at the very least, 1, 2, 3 good spells to take out of the tome. Mantra Purification heals a friendly unit 15, and it only cleanses 2, but in the early game, 5 mana to heal 15 and cleanse 2 is pretty good. That's a very spammable spell for keeping you alive. Inner Mastery is a minor race transformation, so all game your race will get 1 status resist and 20% more healing. That's just generally pretty good. Makes your tier 1 units at the release get to that 1 status resist, so they're not being hit by every single early game debuff, and the 20% healing received scales into the late game. Empowered Strikes is a bit limited. It's not the greatest, but when it is good, it does tend to do good. If you're using shield units or polearm units into the late game, it's pretty solid. It's not good on skirmishers, obviously, because it doesn't even affect their ranged attacks. It doesn't even give you 2 damage on their ranged attacks, it gives you 1. And it also doesn't affect charge units at all. So charge units can't even get like 1 damage increased to 2 for single shot, they just don't get affected at all. So Empowered Strikes is very limited in its usefulness, but overall the tome is pretty decent. There have been some people using this tome with Chaos Battle Mages to do focused aim, so that if enemies are like hiding in shrubs or hiding behind allies or something, and your battle mage like has 3 AP, you can do focus aim and just bam, bam, bam. Guess battle mages are really notable for doing outrageous damage, but generally not having the accuracy due to lacking the Tome of Scrying. So focus aim is a way to kind of bypass that little issue. I don't think it's really good on ranged units because obviously ranged units have no other buffs from the tome, and powered strikes doesn't even affect them. So focus aim has a serious issue here where it's very limited in its usefulness. It's really only good in battle mages. You can take it if you do a shield build or a Pyre Templar build and you do have support units. You know, it can be helpful to make them automatically hit people for consistency, but really it's very limited, so I'm not going to call it that great. Mantra of Purification, Powered Strikes, Inner Mastery, these are the big ones. You notice I haven't talked about Monk. I'm probably not going to talk about Monk. He, like always, shares the same problem every tier 2 unit does. Tier 2 units tend to be stat more like their advanced tier 1 units, which is definitely a problem. When tier 3 units are stat like trucks and tier 4 units are stat like truckboat trucks, then it doesn't really make sense that tier 2 units are basically considered advanced tier 1 units. If we compare this to our good pal, the Zealot, you can notice we have 10 more HP and 1 more defense. That's it. We do get access to Meditate and Leap, but is it really worth taking one of your coveted spell slots? And is it really worth going into tier 2 tomes and building a unit that's more upkeep and takes more draft to build? Is it really worth that just to get these slight minor advantages? Most people are going to say no. Now, if you do get monks out, they are fine. They do have some advantages. It's generally going to be better to save on upkeep costs, clear with heroes, and then try to get to tier 4. Clear with heroes or tier 1 units, get to tier 3 units and use them, or get to tier 4 units and use them. It's just generally how the game's pacing works. If you end up having a bunch of tier 2 units and they end up even having a few tier 3 units will obliterate tier units into the ground. I mean, if we just look at, here's some stats on this unit, let's just look at any average. There we go, there's a tier 3 unit. Look at the differences in stats and all that. Like, it's just not even going to be a close fight, it'll be a slaughter. So I just generally, yeah, tier 2 units aren't where it's at. Okay, so Tome of Inquisition, I'm going to rate as an A tier tome. While it's not that good on its own, it is outrageously good if you're doing a skirmisher build. In fact, it's the best tome in the entire game if you're doing a skirmisher build. Why is that? Why is Tome of Inquisition so good? Looking at the time, I wanted to do this video in under 2 hours, but boy, we might not get there. Tome of Inquisition, why is this tome so good? Because the Inquisitor, that's it. I mean, literally, it's just the Inquisitor. I mean, if you've removed the Inquisitor, no one would go this tome. But the Inquisitor, oh my god, what a truck of a unit. So here we have a tier 3 skirmisher. Skirmishers are notorious for using all, or I should say most, melee buffs in addition to allowing them to apply a lot of these at range. So skirmishers are better ranged units than ranged units. They're also tankier, so that helps them. The Inquisitor saw some buffs and generally is just so powerful. He does 18 damage on his melee attacks, which also have a chance to condemn. He's basically just a zealot, except advanced. He's like the super advanced hyper good zealot. He does start with Zeal, so you could use him with Tome of Zeal, but then you're just wasting that enchantment, so why do it? He recently got the shoot crossbow attack. He used to only have bolted judgment, so every 3 turns he could shoot at range, and then he turned into a melee character, which wasn't too usable. Now the Inquisitor has a very high damage melee attack, coming at 18 damage before any enchantment. Bolt of Judgment is an automatic hit ranged attack with a 90% chance to stun. Shoot crossbow doesn't automatically hit, but now has a 90% chance to hit that does, well, I mean, as you can see here, a decent hunk of damage. He is very damaging at range and can be very difficult for enemies to deal with just because of how much damage he deals. I do think into the hyper late game there are some ways to counter him, but the synergy between Inquisitor and Tome of Cycles, because Blades of Decay automatically apply if your unit has a ranged attack as well. So you can automatically apply Blades of Decay on range, then you can enchant him with the Blooming Projectiles and get 10% more damage against decaying enemies. And then you can get, for example, Poison Blades, whatever it's called, and then you can do 10% more damage in melee against enemies. So Inquisitor is outrageously strong. The rest of the tome has seen some minor touch-ups as well to try to get it to scale a bit better. Teeth Collector is the same as it's ever been. It's just a gold mine province improvement with gold and gold per adjacent farm or forester. So that's fine. It gives you gold. It's not great, but it's not bad. It can be decent into the mid game to just try to eke out some more gold generation. Summon Lightbringer I don't think is very good. It's very good when it's fighting you because it tends to obliterate you, but while using it, enemies will generally be a higher tier than just tier 1. So its chance to convert will be very low, and then you're just left with a very weak battle mage who unfortunately sits back and kind of hurts people, but not that really. Tribunal is a pretty good building, giving you 20 stability and 1 knowledge per population. Even if you're running low knowledge, that's still going to be low pops, that's still going to be 20 stability and 10 knowledge. So I think Tribunal is pretty good. Mass Condemnation is also a pretty good combat spell if you're actually playing out battles or fighting another empire or any situation like that. Being able to condemn 3 enemies automatically allows you to set up some alpha strike turns. If you did go Tome of Zeal, I think Condemnation is probably better in the end because it's just much cheaper and does a bit more damage, but Mass Condemnation is fine too. Yeah. Burden of Guilt is not that great. You hit an enemy army and it loses its move maps on the world map turn. It's odd in simultaneous turns because you need to hit an enemy army before it moves, but you can use it to do some jank stuff. I have seen some jank plays with it. It's not bad, it's just in simultaneous turns it's a bit harder to use, of course, right? Inquisitor himself is like one of the best units in the entire game, just outrageously good. So we have one of the best units in the entire game. We have an iffy world map spell. We have a decent combat spell. We have a pretty decent building. Knowledge is just the best resource, so it's always good. And then we have over here Inquisitor's Mark, which did receive a little bit of a rework. Instead of having that 30% chance to do stuff, it's now 60-60. So 60% chance to inflict weakened, 60% chance to inflict condemned. These are both pretty good things. These effects are increased for single shot attacks, which the Inquisitor will always do at range. And if we look at the Inquisitor here, shoot crossbow doesn't have a chance to condemn. Bolt of Judgment also doesn't have a chance to condemn. Only his melee strike has a chance to condemn. So actually, this tome does affect the Inquisitor himself. Triumph seems to like making a lot of tomes that don't buff the own unit from the tome. For example here, Faded Projectiles doesn't buff support units, which feels very weird to me. That's why things like Tome of Faith are good, because it gets Staves of Mending, and then you get a support unit that uses it. That's great. That's wonderful. Everybody likes it, right? Tome of Discipline gives you Monk, and it gives you Empowered Strikes, which can be pretty usable on Monk with Empowered Strikes. That's like the one saving grace of Monk. Tome of Inquisition gives you Inquisitor with Inquisitor's Mark. That's great. Buffs its own unit. Then you get into some weird tomes again, like Tome of Prophecies, which doesn't buff its own unit, which is odd to me and has always been very frustrating. This also... I'm not going to go into the other issues, but you probably know which tomes I'm talking about. That gives you a unit, and then the enchantment is for a different unit type, and you're sitting there like... Okay. So, Inquisitor's Mark will be, I believe it maths out to a 90% chance to weaken, 90% chance to condemn. Then when they are condemned, they take 10% more damage because the Inquisitors have that zeal. So focus firing a target is pretty strong. Tome of Inquisition is pretty good. Okay, that takes us to Tome of the Beacon. Now I'm going to put Tome of the Beacon in B tier. Despite me using it really well in certain builds, I'm just going to put it in B tier because Mighty Meek was changed to affect tier 2 units, did lose its gold upkeep, and did gain status resistance, but it's still really hard to get Mighty Meek to be usable. You still need to play very specific playstyles, you still need to get the right items on your heroes to get the right summons, you still need to play specific heroes to get it to work. It's just not applicable to overall builds, and it suffers from a problem where the tome is just all over the place. We have no SPI, even having a weak SPI is better than having no SPI. And the tome is just, it's all over the place. So first we buff tier 1 and 2 units. Then we get a tier 3 unit from the tome. The tier 3 unit from the tome was nerfed from 45 to 35 healing, which has significantly reduced his usability. The chaplain is, yeah, he's a little bit weaker than he was right when the expansion launched. I was raving about the tome, then chaplain got nerfed, and I was like, ooh. Conjure Divine Beacon is a pretty good combat spell. It doesn't scale into the hyper late game, but it is an emergency spell that can give you some morale if you're getting moraled out. Gives you 15 hit points of healing instead of the 5 it used to give. So it gives you pretty good AoE healing, gives you morale. This one's a pretty good spell. Then we have Covenant of the Faith, which... okay, I mean, it's not really usable. I would probably never get it. And then we have a summon, a tier 3 summon, so we have Mighty Meek, and then 2 units from the Tome that don't even get Mighty Meek, which means if you do go Tome of the Beacon to use Mighty Meek, you only have 2 usable spells, and a lot of these builds won't even use Conjure Divine Beacon, because they'll have a better spell that they want to cast. So Mighty Meek builds will go it for literally only Mighty Meek. Then people that want to use Summon Blessed Soul from the Tome have no other buffs to Summon Blessed Soul. And people that want to go Chaplain from the Tome have no buffs for Chaplain from the Tome. So it's doing all these different things. It's giving you a powerful early game combat spell that won't scale to late game. It's giving you a very powerful unit enchantment that is very niche and has no other synergy with the Tome. It's giving you support that is no support. It's giving you a shield combat summon. World map summon that doesn't do anything for that. So it's very odd. The Blessed Soul himself is pretty strong. He's coming in here with 100 HP. He is a shield unit, so he does bizarrely low damage for some reason. If we actually look at the Blessed Soul over here, people do like him. He is strong. He doesn't have Zeal. A lot of people think he doesn't have Zeal, so you can give him Zeal. And then once you do give him Zeal, his melee strike will be up there to 16. He's outrageously tanky unless you bring in some of the damage types he's weak to. And he does, of course, have 3 resistance, 100 HP, which is the premier stat line for shield units. The Industrious Shield unit continues to be sad. What are the problems then? He's a non-racial unit. He could be made racial, and that would make him perhaps usable. But for now, he's really good when you rush him, and then he slowly falls off. Archon Smite is a magic single shot, so it doesn't scale. Beacon of Hope is usable, but you need a... It is a strong ability. If an enemy's trying to morale you out, you can... If anyone's at morale low, you can just be like, no, go back up. But you can't stop an enemy from routing you on that very turn. And if you do bring a routing unit back up, it won't unroute until the next turn. Like, it's already used its action moving, right? I think it can still attack with its 1 remaining AP if it did have that. So it's not useless. Beacon of Hope, it's fine. Its damage is good because it gives automatic condemn. It also inflicts marked weirdly, so Blessed Soul is kind of usable with a like if you're doing a battle mage build, you can summon some down in front of the Blessed Soul. But then if you're doing a battle mage build, you're giving a tome that doesn't help battle mages. You see, this is the problem with Tome of the Beacon. It's usable really only for Mighty Meek, and even then, realistically, I should put Beacon. I'm gonna put Beacon down here in C tier because actually, the more I think about it, the more I think it's just a very weird tome that's being pulled in so many different directions that it can't do anything good. Which, of course, brings us to Tome of Virtue. Now, Tome of Virtue is a new tome, and I think that I didn't even rank it because I didn't really know where to rank it, but I think it's C tier. I think it's very fairly in C tier. Now, the problem with Tome of Virtue is tier 2 tomes are very, very harsh on melee builds, let's say. If you are a melee build and you have tier 2 tomes, you have outrageous big hitters like Tome of the Construct, which we'll get into later. You have other really big hitters like Tome of Revelry, which is just outrageously powerful. You have Materium with the Tome of the Artificing for that 25% crit. You have Tome of Shades, which is really good for melee builds. Melee builds have so many tier 2 tomes that are just really, really, really good for them. And then we introduce Tome of the Construct. Sorry, Tome of Virtue. Well, we do introduce Tome of Construct instead of Tome of Virtue, which is a problem with Tome of Virtue. Tome of Virtue has a problem here where we have no SPI. Even Tome of the Construct is an SPI. It's not literally the greatest SPI in the world, but I would call it a pretty good one. Production is fine, and then literally no matter what you're adjacent to, you can produce more resources. So you can slap this down in the middle of nowhere, and you'll generate something, right? So the Worker Construct Nexus is a pretty good SPI. We're not going to spend more time on Construct because we're going to talk about it next. This one has no SPI, in fact. It does have a building in your city that is usable. Gold is generally considered more valuable than food and production, so we're using production to turn our gold into production and food. Surely you see the problem right here. If you have 100 income, you get 20 food, 20 production, but we also used production to build the building. So even if we're getting 20 production, if we look over here into the House of Charity, it would then take us, if we're getting 20 production, it's going to take us 6.5 turns to pay off building its own building. So we're putting ourselves into debt, literally, by losing our gold to then pay for producing our own building. Even if you had 100 gold income, it would still take you 3 turns to pay off building the House of Charity. Now, every building does work like that, but not every building loses you resources while you're doing that. So unfortunately, the House of Charity just doesn't really look like that good of a building, and as I have mentioned a lot, you need to use one of your coveted research slots getting it. Then the rest of the tome is once again confused, like Tome of the Beacon. It doesn't really do much for itself. Its most powerful aspect is a Virtuous Spirit, which gives you 2 automatic Spirit Resist. Then when you're below 60% hit points, you ignore some of your casualties and get Defense and Resist. As you might imagine, there might be some other things in the game that do that exact job, but better. And Tome of the Virtue has the issue where its most powerful aspect is a Summon Vigil, which doesn't even get the racial enchant anyway. The second most powerful aspect of Tome of the Virtue is the Paladin, but I have extensively tested it, and I do not believe that ever going for the Paladin is a better play than just going for 2 melee tomes that enchant racial shield units better. And if you're trying to go for a shield build, it's just going to be infinitely better to go for, it's just better to go for a racial shield unit, the Liege or any of the other ones, and then you just get a racial shield unit. You don't need to spend a research slot on it, and then you can go with Tome of the Construct, and you can go with Tome of Revelry, and you can go with Tome of Shades, and you can go with Tome of Artifice, and you can get all these much better tomes, rather than just go with the Paladin. The Paladin, of course, will then need enchantments, but wait, we've already used a tome slot getting the Paladin, so this is a bit of a problem. So Virtuous Spirit is kind of fine. I would say it's kind of fine. It's decently usable on heroes to help them not die, but even heroes will tend to die in several big hits. So you might be big hit down to like 70%, then big hit down to 30%, and then you get like 1 defense and resistance for the last hit, which is really not as good as you think it is. So Virtuous Spirit maybe should be changed from just being generally Spirit Resist to being generally something else. It would help a little bit. Heroic Stand is a saving grace of this tome because, unlike other invulnerability effects, unfortunately, it doesn't have a limit. You can just cast it every single turn on the same unit, which can become really irritating to fight. It can also become really irritating for enemies to fight on the world map. If you just keep spamming Heroic Spirit, you can't die, which in a lot of weird situations mean you just win combat by using Heroic Stand 3 times on your last unit, which is kind of funny. The Summon Vigil is, as I've mentioned, a pretty decent unit, but it's in a tome that doesn't buff it. So would we go at tier 3? Would we use our coveted tier 2 tome slot to get a battle mage that has no support from the entire rest of the tome? No, of course not. The Vigil himself is a pretty good unit, giving us a chance to blind enemies, which allows us to maneuver around a bit more. Purifying Blast is like really good. You can remove all positive status effects of an enemy, and adjacent enemies lose a little bit. So this is just a pretty decent single target nuke with a little bit of AoE that can allow you to nuke 1 target that was giga buffed up. He does have Zeal, but reasonably, I don't think most people will go with the Tome of Supremacy to get their Battle Mage's Zeal, so it being factored into his base damage already isn't that big a deal. He has Demolisher, which is kind of funny, I guess. Inspiring Killer, realistically, the Vigil is a decently fine Battle Mage unit, but it's in a tome that just doesn't support Battle Mages. You might say, oh, well, you got the Paladin and the Vigil, and maybe it'll be good, but nothing else here is really doing that good. It kind of made a splash on the scene when people were starting to look at it, but the end result is basically going with any other unit is just going to end up being... Sorry, any other tome is just going to end up being better. So this brings us to the better tome. Tome of the Construct. Why is Tome of the Construct better? Because it does everything better. So first off, we've talked about the Worker Construct Nexus. Tome of the Construct, I'm going to put into S tier, just outrageously powerful. The Worker Construct Nexus is a pretty decent research SPI. We have Compounding Defense. When a shield, polearm, or fighter unit is next to another shield, polearm, or fighter unit, they get 1 defense and 1 resist. So if you're going with a shield or polearm build, there's no tier 4 fighter build yet, unfortunately. But if you are going with a shield or polearm build, then Compounding Defense just reads 1 defense, 1 resist. It's going to be quite difficult for you to not be next to an ally when you're running that many melee units. So Tome of Virtue, the Virtuous Spirit, starts to look, in comparison. This brings us to the big synergy of the Tome of the Construct. Now, I did go over this in my Materium video, but we're going to have to go over it again, because I don't expect you guys to watch every single video every single time, even though I know some of you do. We have to start talking a bit faster, because I'm looking at the time here, and I'm looking at how many tomes I've gone through. I'm thinking, okay, maybe we should go here a bit quicker. Okay, so Cascading Command Defend. Well, first off, we need to talk about Linked Minds. Here's the 4 big. You're always going to go at these 4. Don't go at this guy. This guy sucks. We're not even going to talk about Bronze Golem. He's terrible. Linked Minds gives us hyper awareness. So when this entire race, the racial transformation, is standing next to an ally or a construct, but it's going to be next to an ally because Tome of the Construct is bad for constructs, ironically speaking, you get hyper awareness, which means you cannot be flanked. This gives you 360-degree retaliate attacks. This allows you to never be flanked, so shield units can be pretty good here. This means enemies can never get back shots on you. It's just really, really good, Linked Minds. On its own, I don't think I would get it, but of course, this brings us to Cascading Command Defend and Cascading Command Reposition, which are the 2 big things here. Now, we do need to factor in when talking about order, the order orbs. When you build up your mage tower and you choose which spells to enhance, which affinity to enhance, order, shadow, astral, whatever, order has the best ones, period. They can give 3 fortune to any unit you buff or remove all debuffs from any enemy you debuff. Those are the 2 best effects, period. Cascading Command Reposition gives us hastened, so that's a very strong effect, and 1 stack of strengthened. Once you get the orb, that'll be 3 fortune, and hastened and strengthened across our entire board. Later in the battle, you might run into some problems where units are too spread out to get these, but you could still hit enough, or you can reform the line, so to speak, because getting this buff on everyone will be worth wasting maybe 1 or 2 units turns. So this is a very powerful spell. That brings us to Cascading Command Defend, which did get buffed. Cascading Command Defend now gives you Defensive Masters. What it used to do is enter you into defense mode on cast, which was basically finicky and unusable and just never got used. Now it enters defensive mode at the end of your turn, which is significantly better. It also has 2 status effects dispelled, which gives it actually a counter to things like Tier 5 Astral with its Disrupting Wave, or just generally global debuffs or anything like that. So Cascading Command Defend is really usable, slaps you into defense mode, and once you're in defense mode, particularly on shield units or particularly on any other unit that gets a buff for defense mode, that's really strong. A lot of people will take Careless as a racial trait that gives you -1 in defense mode, but even in that situation, we're still talking about a 2 near global status effect dispel on top of getting 1 defense, 1 resist for that turn. So it's still fine, and not everybody takes Careless, but it is something to consider, right? So we're talking about Linked Minds, Cascading Command Reposition, Cascading Command Defend. These are 2 spells that will scale into the late game and be lower on the combat casting cost. So one problem a lot of builds have is they don't have Astral or they don't have Shadow. Shadow with Death Magic, Astral with way more combat casting, Mystic, of course, Culture with lots of more combat casting as well. If you're not doing those, you'll generally end the game, maybe 100, but you will have to spam the combat casting item. So maybe you spend 5, 6, 7 of those on your 3 heroes in battle. Maybe you can get your combat casting up to 150. Maybe you build the +20 version and get to 200. At either rate, you're seeing what I'm saying here. You could cast Cascading Command 4 times in a row, even if you only have the 100 combat casting. You cast it 6 times in a row, you've gotten to 150. You cast it 8 times in a row if you got to 200 combat casting. So for builds that don't have a lot of combat casting, these are invaluable to be spells that, while not as strong as the best spells in the game, they are very strong and aren't reliant on you having high combat casting. So Tome of the Construct is just outright amazing and is one of the tomes that I would consider a near automatic grab if you are affected by it. Tome of Prophecies is an interesting tome. Now, Tome of Prophecies, I'm going to put at A tier, but it's really more of a B tier tome that hard counters certain builds. We'll get to that in a second. Tome of Prophecies has the Temple of the Prophet, which is another one of these conduit SPIs. It tries to be relevant by giving you knowledge per adjacent conduit. Otherwise, it's just 15 mana. Which is fine, I guess. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. It has an SPI, which is better than not having an SPI. We have the buff spell, Battle Divination. Well, before we talk about any of that, we should talk about what Precognition is. Precognition is, this unit avoids the next effect of any ability or spell that does direct damage to it. This does affect AoEs, and you can AoE remove Precognition, but every time you have Precognition, you ignore the next effect that would deal damage to you, which is really, really, really strong, particularly, as you might imagine, against charge units. Charge units really struggle with Precognition and generally don't have any way to fairly deal with it, which can make Tome of Prophecies just really, really difficult for charge builds to deal with, unfortunately. So that's what Precognition is. Now we'll talk about the spells in order. Battle Divination gives you 3 turns of effects. 25% evasion on the first turn. On the second turn, you get Precognition. On the third turn, you get damage. I think the general idea is you spend your first turn of Battle Divination getting evasion to not get shot by range, but evasion is questionably usable. It's still fine, but it's questionably usable. Second turn, you get Precognition, so you run into range, hit enemies, get that Precognition. Third turn, then you get damage, so after you dodged all their attacks, then you hit them really hard. It's got a fine idea. I think it's like a totally fine combat spell. At the end of the day, I rarely end up using it though, because it is fine. It doesn't use that much combat casting. It uses lots of mana, but it doesn't use that lot of combat casting. But I generally just think that Cascading Command will be better and save on combat casting. Even going from 25 to 35, that's 10 less combat casting I have every time I try to use Battle Divination. It also doesn't get buffed by the Order Tomes, so whereas the Cascading Command will completely hard counter any Misfortune build by just giving you 3 global fortune every single turn, Battle Divination doesn't get buffed by that. Any order spell that doesn't get buffed by order orbs is ironically going to come out being weaker because you don't get order orbs. Fated Projectiles gives 20% critical hit chance and faithful to ranged and battle mage units. This is very frustrating for me because it doesn't affect support units, first off, which is a huge downside. Second off, there's a tier 2 tome with 25% crit to melee, so there's already a tier 2 tome that does this but better. And again, you get a support unit in this tome, so it doesn't buff its own unit. I think Fated Projectiles, if it was buffed at 25% and affected support units, I think it would be a lot better. Definitely. I think the only downside the devs see is they don't want you to pay for support units to get more damage, but I think that I would still pay for support units to get more damage, right? Because, I mean, look at this. So, anyway, Fated Projectiles, just, sometimes I research it, but, like, if I had a choice, I wouldn't. Prescient Circlets, oh, as you might imagine right here, every time you enter defense mode, you get Precognition. Can you think of any tome this particularly synergizes with? So anyway, Tome of Prophecies allows shield units to completely hard counter charge units, which is ironic because it used to be the other way around. Shield units will still lose to polearm units, but now polearm units completely, I mean, they already did trash charge units, but now they trash them even harder, and it makes them tankier even against AoE spam, because now you can potentially Cascading Command defend and get this Precognition every turn. Tome of Prophecies just... The synergy with Tome of the Construct is outrageous. The synergy with other tomes is okay. Oracle herself is a fine support unit. It's a tier 4 support unit. Now, I have found it to ironically have some usability issues. It is a tanky tier 4 support unit, so when you look at it from that perspective, it does fine. But I've ironically found sometimes that it might just be straight up better to go with a tier 2 cultural support unit if you have a good one. That's because healing Portent is fine, but often you only take damage onto a few units, particularly if you have Precognition spam. Your side units tend to just not really take any damage. You also get Precognition when you end your turn in defense mode, so giving your units Precognition often just doubles up, but you can't double up Precognition, that's not how it works. So it leaves you to Striking Portent, which gives you Fortune and True Strike, but you already have 3 fortune near permanently with order, so this just gives you true strike. So the only usable build this would be is maybe doing a build with charge units and giving them AoE true strike to try to counter units, but that's weird. It does a bit of damage, but of course we've talked about the problem. The tome doesn't buff its own unit, which is odd. We do have Scrying Eye. It can't become flanking and it can't be distracted. Okay. So the problem I have with this unit is particularly when you start to look at like racial units like Bannerman. I've literally found Bannerman to be better because if you have a mount, it has more movement speed. That's good. It also just passively gets War Banner. All adjacent friendly units get a defense and resistance. All adjacent friendly units take 10% less damage is what this reads. That's pretty good. Soothing Standard puts you into defense mode every other turn, and it gives some morale. Morale will generally be at full with order anyway. But once you enter defense mode, you have defense mode warding, which gives all those adjacent units 3 defense and 3 status resist. That's 4 resistance, a defense, and 3 status resistance for Bannerman just running up and using Soothing Standard. The Oracle looked really good on release, but the unfortunate reality of the situation I found is that once you go Tome of Prophecies, ironically the Oracle starts conflicting with its own tome and not really being that good, which feels weird to me. At either rate, the Tome of Prophecies tends to just... I like pressing circlets, and this is so good that you might just go the entire tome for this. After that, it becomes a lot of, yeah, I guess, yeah, I guess, yeah, I guess. I think if the Oracle was affected by faded projectiles and was changed to 25%, then you could use the Oracle and use it kind of as a backline damage unit that used its AoE heal when needed and otherwise just sat there being a background damage unit. But 24 damage this late in the game is not that much. We've probably double or triple quad enchanted our melee units, so it's really not that good as a damage unit because there's just very little support buffs for it. This means Tome of Prophecies, if you want to use faded projectiles, is best in a battle mage build, but wait, battle mages cannot spare tier 3 tome. You automatically go Tome of Amplification with battle mages, and you automatically go Tome of Geomancy or Tome of Transmutation. That means Tome of Prophecies cannot compete with those tomes. It's just not better. Faded projectiles would just need to be buffed, and I think the Oracle would need to be buffed in a little way as well. Otherwise, it's decent. If you do desperately need a counter to charge units as battle mages, you can maybe try to go back for Tome of Prophecies as your like on a tier 4 tome if you just have to. Even that can be a bit weird because tier 4 tomes can spike really hard for battle mages in how strong they are. 4C Downfall is a siege project. It's another one of these siege projects that will generally win you the siege, but unfortunately have you the problem that once you go with these strong siege projects, a lot of people will just not take the siege and instead take the field battle, which seems to be a recurring problem of siege projects. Okay, Tome of Prophecies. If you're fighting charge units, really good. If you're not fighting charge units, probably don't bother. Tome of Sanctuary then tends to be the one you will go automatically. Why Tome of Sanctuary? Because we have some things here that are just very annoying for enemies and very, very strong. Consecrated Domain. Your city gets 2 resistance and 20 morale for every unit in its domain. Attacking someone with Consecrated Domain is almost impossible, in fact. It's really strong. Just don't even... It's really, really, really strong. It's so defensive. Anointed People. A racial transformation with 2 status resist and 3 spirit resist for your entire race. Already between this one and this one, you're seeing why Tome of Prophecies might end up losing unless you're fighting charge units. Up next is Keeper's Mark, which gives all your melee units faithful, reducing their upkeep, which helps pay for this unit enchantment to begin with, and then when you take fatal damage for the first time, you become pacified and steadfast. This gives you a lot of time to heal the unit back up, or back it out, or just generally be really goddamn annoying by not allowing your front line to leave the board on the first turn and allowing you to get some advantage, because now they'll have to spend another turn killing the unit. Summon Light Spirit did get nerfed. Heal did go from a Cooldown 1 to cooldown 2, and it went from a 60 heal to a 50 heal, so that got nerfed really hard. Brilliant Phase, though, is still an automatic blind on enemies, which has heavy synergy with Tome of Shades, so Summon Light Spirit is still pretty good if you went Tome of Shades. Healing Spires, if you do decide to defend a siege battle, is really, really strong. You get 4 Healing Spires that will, friendly units in the domain heal 12 hit points per turn. So if you have like really high HP and you walk back to your city to heal up units that are at low health, this actually helps. But then in combat, the Healing Spires, every single turn can do a 15 heal. That's 4 Healing Spires, each healing 15 a turn. This isn't a cooldown 1 ability like a lot of other siege projects, or I should say defense projects, anti-siege projects. This is usable every single turn. Healing Spires heals 60 then in total between the 4 of them and gives you bolstered resistance every single turn. Healing Spires in combination with Consecrated Domain can be very difficult to push through. Now, Salvation tends to be the one that nobody picks, even though the synergy seems to be between Salvation and Keeper's Mark. A unit goes to 1 health, then you Salvation, heal them to full. Problem is, I generally am going to want to get Consecrated Domain every game, I'm generally going to want to get Anointed People every game, and I'm generally going to want to get Keeper's Mark every single game. So that leaves one of these for you to pick, unless you go back and pick it from a tier 4 tome. Because some tier 4 tomes only have like 2 good effects, and then you want to go back and pick an effect from a previous tome to advance onto the next tome. The Sanctuary SBI is also just straight up better than Tome of Prophecies. This one gives 15 mana and 5 knowledge per conduit. You don't want conduits. They're bad. This one gives you 15 mana, and pillaging province improvements in this domain takes +2 turns and yields negative 30% resources. This is way stronger. So Tome of Prophecies comes out and it's like, help me, I don't even know what I'm doing. I'm buffing battle mages in a support tome, but actually I'm mostly buffing shield units. So, man, my throat. Generally speaking, this Fated Projectiles could be buffed, but it's not, and therefore I think the entire tome, that's why I put it down there in A tier. If it wasn't for its anti-charge synergy, I think I'd put it in C tier. Just something to keep in mind for Tome of Prophecies. If it wasn't for its synergy, you know what? I should probably write that. I'm going to do it like this. Prophecies S against charge. Prophecies C against non-charge. I think that's the best way to phrase it, to try to make it non-confusing, right? Tome of Sanctuary is just better in every single way. Tome of Subjugation, I'm going to call this an A tier tome. Oh, I know, I called it a B tier tome. Tome of Subjugation, I'm going to call B tier. I think that's fair. Tyrant Knights are definitely strong, and they definitely have heavy synergy with Undead, and they definitely can win games off morale bombing. Very strong, that one. But the rest of the tome leaves a little bit to be desired. We do have a lot of strong things here, but we have no SPI, which isn't great. Final Ultimatum is interesting in a way. You can use the new Tyrant Knight ability, Oppress, to force a unit to rout. Then once they are force routed, you can Final Ultimatum them, but that uses a lot of your turn and should only really be used as a desperation play. So no SPI, pretty good unit. I would say the Tyrant Knight is pretty good right now. A spell that's very niche. Subjugating Raid is a decent siege project because you can just use Subjugating Raid. Even if your enemy isn't going to defend the city, this helps you build up your cities. So I'd consider Subjugating Raid to just generally be a good siege project. I pretty much take it every game because, especially if you're chewing through a player or you're chewing through free cities, this just helps you build up your cities. And this is not even considered an evil action. Baron's Palace is very difficult to use. Mostly by the time that you're at the point of conquering other players' cities, you probably already have 3, 4, 5 of your own. And it's on a tier 3 tome itself, so already like decently into the game. So you have to put this into cities of another race. You have to conquer another race, then you put this in the city. Now if you do, your throne city gets Imperium and gold and food. I mean, it's a little bit low, the amounts. The city itself gets city stability and draft, which is I guess. Generally, I'm not going to be trying to draft out of cities of another race because they won't have all my racial enchantments. I could cast my racial enchantments for them. That's going to take like 15 extra turns, so that's a total waste of time. It is one way to generate Imperium, but really, I just don't think it's that good. So really, we're looking at Tyrant Knight, Subjugating Raid, and Intimidating Aura. Now, if you're not using Tyrant Knight, there is basically no reason, in my opinion, to ever go for this tome, ever. It just doesn't do anything if you're not looking for Tyrant Knight. Compared to other tomes that give you a tier 4 racial unit, I also think it's a bit weaker. It's down there with like Warbreed for like, it's got 2 good things, a decent thing, and that's it. And I just think, especially if you compare it to some other tomes that give tier 4 units, that they end up looking way stronger. But that's not to say that Tyrant Knight is weaker, just that I would put it in B tier because, well, there's other tomes that give tier 4 racial units that just do a lot more. That's about all I can say for Tome of Subjugation. Intimidating Aura does stack with Nightmares, do keep that in mind. I don't know why it does, I don't know if it'll ever be fixed, but for now it does. So really, Tome of Subjugation, Subjugating Raid, Tyrant Knight, Intimidating Aura. Those are your 3 things. No SPI, kind of weak. Okay, move on to Tome of the Cleansing Flame. Tome of the Cleansing Flame has been really hard nerfed. Now, I think the last time I rated the tome, I rated it S tier. Now that it's been really hard nerfed, I'm going to rate it at S tier because it got hit pretty hard. So it's a bit lower. I mean, it's gone from S to S. Okay, now why is Tome of the Cleansing Flame so ridiculous then? SPI is a Forester. Foresters aren't great, but we do just have a SPI that gives every single unit produced in the city faithful, which is good. That just reduces their upkeep. It also gives you gold. Now, you might notice, I'm going to talk about this just once, it lost the automatic Flame Herald's Consecration. That is not an automatic of the tome, which I think was a really good decision from the developers. Now, you need to get Flame Herald's Consecration from various effects in the tome, which I will go into. So the Pyre Shrine gives all defensive battles Flame Herald's Consecration, which gives you a distinct advantage against enemies, and it gives you 15 gold, which is pretty decent. Can give you some draft if you have other Foresters, but I found Foresters to be terrible. SPI is good just because it does a lot of different things. Zealous Inquisition on its own is an okay spell. What really makes it a great spell from merely being an okay spell is its synergy with the Order Orb. As I did mention, all debuffs from Order remove all enemy buffs. Every single one of them. Should probably be nerfed. Should definitely get nerfed. You might notice Zealous Inquisition is a buff-debuff spell, although it only buffs 1 unit. And although you will often be using Tome of the Construct spells, Zealous Ignition here is another spell for mere 30 combat casting that can give you a lot of output. It gives 1 unit 2 strengthened, which is not really that big a deal. All enemy units in a 2 hex radius suffer condemned. This allows you to get that 10% damage boost, and it creates Cleansing Flame on the ground. And because it's a debuff, it strips all units in a 2 hex radius of every buff. Do they have 5 stacks of bolstered resistance, 5 stacks of strengthen, 5 stacks of grace, 5 stacks of... Well, you can only stack grace to 3, but you get my idea, right? You can AoE strip enemies of every single buff. You can strip them of steadfast if you're trying to deal with steadfast builds in a way, right? You can strip them of everything. This makes this spell a very versatile spell. Additionally, just slapping every enemy into Cleansing Flame and slapping every enemy with Condemned is very good for getting momentum in a battle, because it will be hard for them to maintain more buffs. It will be pretty difficult for them to even play into Zealous Inquisition itself. So it's a lot of times you're just going to be using the construct spells, but I also think that Zealous Inquisition is another one of these spells. Pure Flame Staves. Now, here's the funny thing. When we look at Tome of Prophecies and we look at Cleansing Flame, Pure Flame Staves affects all supports and battle mages. Could probably just be changed to Pure Flame Projectiles and affect range units and skirmishers, but okay. But just make it ranged attacks so skirmishers don't get it on melee. I mean, it wouldn't really matter. They already have Flame Blessed Champions, so anyway. But make Pure Flame Staves affect range units at least. But at any rate, if you do use it on a support unit, that support unit will automatically create a Cleansing Flame under an enemy and give them a chance to condemn. Not really that amazing. I wouldn't shoot for it if I had anything better. Temple of the Pyre is another building that you can put in your city. Gives it that 10 fortification health, which is pretty coveted. It's kind of hard to get fortification health, but here you can just get it. So it makes it pretty strong. All enemy units start the battle in this city's domain with Condemned. That's pretty good. And then you ignore income and stability penalties from being under siege, which is fine. It's one of those things like you don't really want to use that bonus because that's bad, but, you know, in a pinch, it's fine. Flame Blessed Champions is pretty good. All your melee attacks get a chance to burn enemies, which does synergize with the Blades of Fire, or whatever it's called, and you create Cleansing Flame under enemies, and the Cleansing Flame is now automatic, so this is pretty good for just burning enemies, getting advantage over long fights. Enemies will be losing their buffs and taking a flame dot, and it does just cause more dots on enemies, which can confuse cleanse effects. A lot of cleanse effects have been changed to only cleanse 1 or cleanse 2. Most of the single targets are still cleanse full, but most of the AoE ones are cleanse 1, cleanse 2. So just getting more dots to slap on enemies can confuse them into, well, hitting effects that you don't want to be cleansing. No one cares about 1 or 2 stacks of burning, right? But oops, now you cleansed it. Consecrating Firestorm is another way to get Flame Herald's Consecration, because you get Consecrating Firestorm, which creates cleansing flames on the battle, and then gives your side Flame Herald's Consecration. Flame Herald's Consecration, all burning ground becomes cleansing flames, and slain enemy units create cleansing flames. So there's a way to counter builds that use fire, even though Pyre Templar does that already, and it's not like vital, you don't need it, but it was good that they took it from like you unlock the tome and you just get this for free to you have to use it. So this is a pretty decent combat spell because you can make a lot of the ground on fire, which your side ignores, their side often won't, but if they do have Zeal, they'll ignore it as well, or Faithful. There's lots of ways to get Zeal and Faithful, so a lot of builds will just ignore it by default, which can be annoying, but oh well. It's just generally a good way to hit an enemy on the world map and then get some combat bonuses out of it. That brings us to the Pyre Templar. Now, the Pyre Templar has received some nerfs, but realistically, he's just still the best unit in the game. If you looked at each unit class in the game and you compared the advantage of each unit class in the game, unfortunately, Polearm would be by far the best. Polearms get 1 defense and charge resistance and first strike and bonus damage to cavalry and large units. That's 4 different buffs. Shield units get -2 damage and the shield effect in defense mode shield wall. 2 buffs and a nerf, and the nerf is probably a pretty big deal. So polearm units are outrageously powerful. That polearm effect just hits practically every late game unit anyway, so these units are one of the highest damage units despite having low base damage. Tier 4 polearms should have 18 damage, they instead only have 16. That's not good. And they have Zeal, so you can't put Zeal on them. That's not good either. Well, I mean, them having Zeal for free is a pretty good deal, though. But what you might be seeing here is you deal damage to units in a 1 hex cone. That's pretty good, as you might imagine. So being able to ignite multiple enemies, being able to proc the Barbarian crit maybe on multiple enemies, being able to put the Consecrating Flame under multiple enemies, being able to proc Blades of Decay under multiple enemies. Fire Cleave is very effective. And of course, being a polearm unit, we got that charge resist first strike. The fire resist was lowered to 4, but they still have status effect immunity burning, which means that even if you don't have Flame Herald's Consecration down, all burning builds just fall on their face and die if they're fighting Pyre Templar. Additionally, we have 4 defense. That's because polearm gives 1 and tier 4 gives 3. Then it gives 2 extra defense because it does. So when we look at the stat line, despite losing a defense a bit ago, it still has an outrageously good defensive stat line. It will automatically beat any other melee build in melee, and it's just a very, very powerful unit. Every single melee build at present loses to Pyre Templars. The only thing you need to do is keep them in high morale, but it's pretty easy with builds that get Pyre Templars to be sitting at full morale the entire game. Then Tome of Prophecies completely hard counters Tyrant Knights anyway, so there's not a whole lot that Tyrant Knights can even do to begin with to try to fight Pyre Templars. So Tome of Cleansing Flame, we're putting this back up at S tier. It dropped from S tier to S tier. There's my joke. I'm going to keep repeating it. Okay. Tome of Supremacy. Now this tome I'm going to call a B tier tome. In the past I think I called it C or even D tier, but it has received a very large amount of buffs. We still don't have an SPI, which is bad. Some of the tomes up here actually have quite powerful SPIs, but we do have some powerful effects here. Number 1, Anthem of Victory got its combat casting reduced from 65 to 50. So Anthem of Victory is now 3 strengthened with the Order Orb, 3 fortune, and 15 morale globally. At a mere 50 combat casting, this makes this way more usable, way more powerful, and if you're ever fighting morale bombers, this is a pretty good way to start the fight with a lot of buffs already on you, and in the morale range where you might not get morale bombed out of the battle. I think Monument of Supremacy get buffed a little bit. I can't remember. It's a city structure. It gives 30 draft and some city stability. The more cities you have with it, the more stability you get. Often order builds can overcap stability, but more is more, and it's still 30 draft. This brings us to the Exemplar, who has received a large amount of buffs. Now, it is a bit difficult to fit Exemplars into your build, but it is doable. Melee Strike is just a melee strike. Unlike other shield units, the Exemplar does not get punished for being melee, and instead of having lower damage, actually has decent damage. It does get Zeal here by default, so you can't stack it with Zeal, but we do have 18 damage if you didn't go with Zeal. So ignore Tome of Zeal, and this unit will actually have average damage for a tier 4 unit. Incredible, a shield unit that doesn't pay a penalty for being a shield unit. Additionally, we got Graceful Defense here. Every time you enter defense mode, you get a Grace. That's pretty strong. Add in Blessed Armors, add in Cascading Command Defend. Embolden Allies, although still weird because you can't use it if an enemy is in your zone. This is a way to get even more morale into your build, and with the spell, this will give you 2 AoE strengthened. So if you have, for example, 1 Exemplar in each stack, and you give everyone 2 strengthened, and then you use the spell from the Tome of Supremacy, you can start the battle at 5 strengthened, and then boom. It also gives you Inspiring Presence. You get 25% more morale on every unit. Inspiring Killer. Realistically, you're going to be overcapping your morale so hard, especially with 3 AoE Rally, but this can help counter morale bomb builds. Basically, 1 Exemplar in your army will completely counter morale builds. Like, if you put 1 Exemplar in each stack, or even 1 on the field to begin with, and you go Tome of Supremacy, you'll counter morale builds pretty damn hard. I don't think you'll have any issue with them. So Exemplar's 120 HP, flying, 48 movement speed. Like, this dude is a truck. So he's a very high damage unit, very tanky, very difficult to deal with. The Graceful Defense can mean that he gets turn 1 Blessed Armor, runs up, gets a 2nd Bless. Now when your enemy tries to attack him, he might have 3 Blesses, or so I should say 3 Graces on him, and then he enters defense mode, gets another Grace. With Blessed Armor, that's +1 Grace, then Graceful Defense, that's 2 Grace. This unit can be very frustrating for enemies, particularly if you have any sort of global regeneration from your heroes or anything like that. I've run Exemplars into the backlines of enemies, and they will often find it just pointless to even try to fight them. It just, what does it matter, right? Like, why would I even try to attack this dude? He's not gonna die. So he has found some usability, but he is let down, unfortunately, by the tome. That's right, Tome of Supremacy here has some problems. As you might imagine, the Anthem of Victory is very good. Exemplar is good. Everything after that falls apart. Supreme Magic grants Zeal and causes enemies to explode. This is usable only on supports and battle mages. The problem with this is you might have 1 support per army, and it does kind of give you some counterplay to regenerating builds. For example, if you're fighting undead and you last hit an enemy with a mage, or I should say your support, because you won't be using battle mages in this build, but like if you're bannermen, you'll probably still have bannermans in a shield build. Maybe you'll move to oracles, but I think bannermen unironically are better. So you have your bannerman, you last hit an enemy with it, it explodes, it can't revive, because you like, I guess the idea here is you're like disintegrating their unholy appearance, right? So, I mean, maybe, I don't know, that's my headcanon. They're just blowing up, okay? They're just blowing up. Anyway, they can't revive a not dead body, because there is no body. They have to revive a body, so there's no dead body, so they can't revive it. So Supreme Magic does give you like a soft counter to revive builds, so it's kind of good for that perspective. Overall though, Zeal, that's just 4 damage. You do 4 more damage, and then you do a little bit more to enemies that are condemned. This is why it's frustrating for me. I wish Tome of Prophecies just buff support units, because if Tome of Prophecies buff support units and it got moved to 25% crit, like, you could actually have these support units in the back scaling decent damage, because I can't use a support ability every single turn. It would just be helpful. Triumph, that's all I'm saying. It would just be helpful. Condemn army condemns an enemy army for 5 world map turns, and they take 20 spirit damage. So if you do see a battle about to begin, like if you're like looking at the world map and you're like, "Ooh, he's prepping his armies to fight me," you can slap this down on that army, and then like they could shuffle all the units between their stacks and try to make it annoying for you, but now you're just being really annoying for them, right? And so this is actually a really good condemn spell. And so the problem with this tome as a whole is that you're really going this tome only for if you want Exemplar. Exemplar is a good unit, but reasonably, like, I get what they're going for. It's the shield and support unit tome. I get what they're going for, but like maybe if it had an SPI or I don't know, something. I think it would need like something a little bit more, just something, because tier 4 tomes have power creep pretty hard, and I think that Tome of Supremacy hasn't really unfortunately. What does that sound? Is that the Exemplar in the background? Has he just been here the whole time? Exemplar, what are you doing? Okay, that's a weird bug. Anyway, I have gone Tome of Supremacy. I have used it as a finisher for a shield build. Exemplars are just outrageously strong. They're just like, oh my god. And it does give you, again, a little bit of counterplay to revive builds. I think shield builds are a little bit weak to revive builds anyway, so having like something you can do is nice. And then Anthem of Victory, if your line never breaks or anything like that, and you just need to get fortune and strengthen back on everyone on the field, Anthem of Victory is just global. Boom. Okay, this takes us to Tome of Prosperity, which I believe we put in A tier. There is nary a melee build that will not use Tome of Prosperity. It's just that good. Now, this does have an SPI. Now, I specifically call out the SPIs at tier 4 because you might notice a certain something here on literally every other tome than Supremacy. Yeah, but Prosperity's SPI is pretty decent. You get city stability per farm and forester, you get food per farm and forester adjacent, and then you get 10% of your food converted into gold. Very good in the late game to afford infinite late game armies, and food just generally is not very usable in the late game. The most powerful aspect of the tome, and the one I'll go over first immediately, is Blessed Armors. Every melee unit just gets 2 resist and Inner Grace. At the start of your turn, if you don't have Grace, you get Grace. This is really strong for picking, or I should say for countering enemy global damage. This is really strong for countering enemy harass damage. And this is really strong for if you have a giant beefy melee line that the enemy can't focus one unit down at a time because you've got them locked all into your zone of control. So Blessed Armor is just outrageously strong. Grand Protection is a spell here. In a 2 hex radius, we get 2 Grace, 2 Regeneration, 2 Bolstered Defense, 3 Bolstered Defense, 3 Bolstered Resistance, and then of course you get that Order Orb, you get 3 Fortune. Really strong. Its only problem is that Tome of the Construct is competing with it. Now it is really strong, mind you, Grand Protection. I think that reasonably with the Order Orb, it's you add the 3 Fortune in there and it's really strong. If you went to Tome of Prosperity with the Nature Orb, 10 Healing is not as strong. Yeah. So again, maybe the Order Orb could be toned down a little bit, or maybe the Nature Orb could be toned up a little bit. You get my idea. Garden of Effluence is another pretty good building. I'm not going to build it every game, but when I do build it, it's nice. Farm and Foresters in your domain give you gold and mana, so you can generally, off Prosperity, just have infinite gold. It also fixes your mana issues if you have any mana issues late game. That's why I always say mana is kind of worthless, because you tend to happen to fix your mana issues without really trying. Then, of course, we got some city stability here. You need more. Staves of Grace is why I like still continuing to bring my support units even into the late game, because my support units get Inner Grace, so just imagine they resist global effects, anything like that. Your support abilities grant a Grace, so if you have, for example, a Vow Keeper to AoE heal, that's AoE Grace. If you have Mending Touch from Tome of Faith, that's +1 Grace right there as well. And then you get the Cleansing Rain ability. This ability, although it can only be used every 4 turns, and although it's a full action, can do some outrageously powerful effects. Enemy units have every positive status effect dispelled, and friendly units have every negative status effect dispelled in an AoE. So if you slap this even over an enemy tank box, removing 4 or 5 units pure buff stack can be really detrimental. This means they might have to spend another turn getting all those buffs back onto them, limiting their action economy, or if they have Steadfast, you can dispel Steadfast, or if they've debuffed a bunch of units, you can just be like, no! And then remember, every unit that you buff with the Cleansing Rain will get that Grace. So Stabs of Grace is just a very powerful spell. It gives you a soft counter to Steadfast builds, it gives you a way to keep your support units alive, and it just gives you a way to continue to scale your support units into the late game by giving everybody more grace on their effects. Okay, then there is Summon Prosperity Dragon. Now Prosperity Dragon did get nerfed. Apparently he's not counted as that one. Prosperity Dragon did get nerfed, and he's less usable than he was in before, but he's still just as frustrating as ever. We have a very tanky backline unit who has Radiant Spike, not very great of a nuke, but we're not talking about his nuke, are we? We're talking about his unique effects here. He has Inner Grace, so he once again resists global effects and will generally be frustrating to deal with, and then he has Reign of Prosperity. Every friendly unit on the field, once every 3 turns. It used to be once every 2 turns, but it obviously got nerfed for being a little bit aggressively overtuned. Every friendly unit gets a Grace and loses 1 negative status effect. So being able to do a 1-hit cleanse on the entire board can really frustrate certain builds, because losing your entire stack of, for example, Weaken because it got hit by Reign of Prosperity is bad. Really frustrating, in fact. So then all your allies get Grace. With Inner Grace, that's 2 stacks of Grace. Now all your dudes are just going to be really tanky. I'm sure if you fought a Prosperity Dragon, you've seen just how frustrating this can be to deal with, right? Like, it's not a pleasant experience. It's not a fun ordeal. That is why they got nerfed, because it was just really all 2 Prosperity Dragons doing Reign of Prosperity every turn. You know, just going 1, 2, 1, 2. Very difficult to deal with. Now you need 3 Prosperity Dragons to do that, which is equally as frustrating, but at least it takes 1 more unit in the army. The other ability they have that is really strong is the Mask of Prosperity. You link to a friendly unit, and then that unit will take any damage they take instead goes to the Prosperity Dragon with a 35% reduction. And every turn, this unit and that unit get a stack of Grace. As you might imagine, this is a very effective way. If you link to a unit at half health, that unit will no longer take damage, and then each time they're attacked, they heal 10 each turn. So that's really strong, ironically, just really, really strong. And then the Prosperity Dragon can sit in the back, eating Grace. So he just heals on his own Inner Grace. This can just be very frustrating. And then when you recall the Mask of Prosperity, break the Mask of Prosperity. All Grace stacks are consumed. And then for every Grace stack on the units, they heal 10 and get a stack of regeneration. So if the unit up front hasn't been attacked and has gotten to 3 stacks of Grace, you can then recall the Mask of Prosperity as a free action. It will then heal 10, get 3 regeneration. 3 regeneration, that's heal 18. So 10, 10, 10, 18, that's 48 healing if you let the unit in front just sit there and didn't attack them because you didn't want to attack the Mask of Prosperity. Then, of course, this unit will then heal 30 and then also get 3 stacks of regeneration. So if you did happen to attack this unit a lot, even if it only uses its Inner Grace and its free stack of Grace, it's still going to heal 20 and then get 2 stacks of regeneration to heal 32. And then the frustrating part is if you've linked to a unit up front, you're hitting that unit up front to try to kill the Prosperity Dragon, and then he breaks the link. Well, now you can't hit the Prosperity Dragon, who's now in the back and he's healing. So yeah, this unit is a frustrating unit to fight. Very frustrating. Very strong and frustrating. Okay. This, of course, then brings us off the Tome of Prosperity, which is just a really good tome, Tome of Exaltation. Tome of Exaltation, I'm going to call it B-tier tome. It's got some really powerful aspects of it, and it's got some really weak aspects of it. Now, the powerful aspect is probably the ruler statue. This is another conduit, yay! But what this does is your ruler respawns faster. Your ruler respawns 3 turns, then 2 turns, and with this 1 turn. So if your ruler dies on a turn, he comes back on your next turn. That's pretty good. Spells can continue to be cast even if your ruler is dead. So even if your ruler gets completely alpha striked in an unexpected way, then you still get to cast spells. You still get to continue and play the battle. So Tome of Exaltation already starts with ruler statue, which is really good. But then in addition to that, you now generate more Imperium. with each free city that you have a supreme vassalage with. Yeah, so it was a pretty powerful SPI. Shrine of Smiting. Now, Shrine of Smiting did get a little bit of a buff back, but the main use of Shrine of Smiting right now is to combo it with Tome of Shades. And instead of using Smiting Prayer Blast, now you can use Smiting Prayer Blast, and I do think it's, it's still pretty good for that. It does have Breaching. It does get up to 10 more damage. So, or say 20 more damage. Just stack up to 10 times. And if you do stack it up to 10 times, that's 40 more damage, 20 more spirit, 20 more fire. So you stack, you've got 10 units, 20, that's 40. So you're looking at 57. Is that, wow, that's so much. Holy crap. Sorry, not 57, 37. 37 fire, 37 spirit. Okay, my brain sometimes don't math so well. So it's still a large chunk, a hunk of damage, especially with breaching. But I would say the main way people use Shrine of Smiting is with a Tome of the Shades. And what you do is you run the Shrine of Smiting up to the front line and you use Divine Vengeance. Divine Vengeance is an AoE blind, which will then allow you to get the 50% armor penetration from the Tome of Shades. So Shrine of Smiting becomes a very effective way for your melee to penetrate the opponent's melee and just completely shit on them and beat them all the way down the line. So I think it's pretty strong, yes. Okay. Its other buff was to get Distracting Aura. Cool, I guess. I don't know. Other than that, Shrine of Smiting, it's okay for Tome of Shades synergy. It also has some synergy with Smiting Prayer Blast, hitting enemies for really high damage. Really depends what you want. Hitting enemies with 2 or 3 Smiting Prayer Blasts can just do a lot of damage. So that can be really irritating for enemies, right? What other things does Tome of Exaltation have then that are really good? Well, let's see. We got Resurrect Unit, which is not very good. Returning a dead unit for 40 combat casting is really inefficient unless this unit was like your world, your joy, the only thing you loved in life. Unless it's like that effective, like I just don't think it's really gonna make that big a deal. It's good in a pinch, I guess, like if you lost your literal favorite unit, but otherwise there's probably better things you can do with your combat casting, right? Temple of the Exalted is pretty good, especially if you've gotten like a Scholar Governor. Income from governors in the cities doubled is really good for Scholar Governors. Like, holy crap. So Temple of the Exalted, 20 city stability, 10 mana. That's why I always call mana worthless. Your mana issues just tend to get fixed haphazardly by not really even paying attention. So Temple of the Exalted is another way to just sort of fix your mana issues in your empire without really even trying. So if you've gone with like a Scholar or a whatever the draft dude is, or the quarry dude, you know what I mean? Any of your governors, you double your income from the governors, so it's pretty good. The only units it's really bad on is like a champion governor, because congratulations, you get more food. I mean, I guess this does mean that you get an extra mana knowledge. Is it mana? I think it's food knowledge and mana per population, but then we're talking about like, I mean, when you look at it from that perspective, it's still like 15 knowledge, 15 gold. That's not too bad, right? So, I mean, Temple of the Exalted, I would say it's good no matter what, but it just definitely excels at certain units. Angelic Transformation, then. Okay. So, the problem with Angelic Transformation is that the devs need to keep it really weak because flying is overpowered. Flying is so overpowered, in fact, that people hate flying. Flying ignores all zone of control, which is ridiculous. Really unfun. Stupid, in fact. Being able to fly past all enemy units makes any shield unit completely worthless. It makes having a front line worthless. It's why people go with builds where their entire army will be like 15 battle mages and 3 heroes, because what's the point of having a front line if they can literally walk past it? So flying is overpowered, so the rest of the effect has to be weak. What is the rest of the effect? Celestial. For 2 spirit resist, of which you'll already have like 3, maybe, yeah, 3 probably from Sanctuary, so now you go to 5 spirit resist. Anyone bringing in spirit damage to fight angels is just wasting their spirit damage. So they're just wasting their damage as a total. Just make a different weapon, right? But then you get slammed with 4 blight resistance negative and 4 frost resistance negative. That's really bad. That's really, really bad. There is some synergy with Astras, which we'll get to later, but the harsh reality is The angel transformation is really just there to get you in a transformation. There's a lot of situations where it's better to not. It's the only major race transformation where I actually think in a lot of situations, just don't. Just like sit on Tome of Exaltation and then just don't activate angelic transformation. It can actually make you weaker. There was a little bit of synergy brought by this expansion for Celestials, but overall it's a bit problematic, obviously. It's not like Undead where you can turn off the resistance debuffs, right? Undead definitely can do that, but Angels really can't. So we'll talk about its synergy later, but for now, if you need flying, it's good. If you don't need flying, if you're just getting into a melee brawl with enemies, it can end up causing you to take more damage for no advantage. Ascended warriors, non-hero units in the target army gain 1 rank. This is hypothetically good, but the harsh reality is it's so much world map casting that it's really hard to cast this at any reasonable rate. You could try to cast this in maybe like a dragon build to force your dragons to turn into pure dragons, but it's just so much world map casting. I think this is one of those times where they need to de-link mana cost from world map casting. Maybe if this was like 300 mana at 150 world map casting, it would be good. Maybe in that situation, but right now it's like you're this deep in order, unless you went order and got some astral stuff, like it's gonna be really hard for you to get enough world map casting to make this usable, but it can be helpful in a pinch to finish off a stack of champions into legendaries. That can be good. Tome of the Revenant, I'm gonna do a bit of a funny thing here. I'm gonna call Tome of the Revenant F tier, but let me put in parentheses in order. This literally does nothing for order. This is entirely a shadow tome. It should just be double shadow. I don't like, it's thematically order shadow, but even then, why? In fact, it being order shadow is one of the things that has actually caused it to be so frustrating to fight. So first off, it generates souls and doesn't do anything other than generate souls. It gives you soul harvest. None of this stuff over here has anything to do with order. Chamber of the Right gives you natural regeneration, which is actually a nature and chaos thing, so neither of these colors have anything to do with natural regeneration. The diffusion of affinity themes continues. I really wish the devs would like stick to it and be like, this, like nature chaos, they get natural regeneration. Like order and shadow getting it is just silly. But it's only undead drafted units, so you're gonna have to go with Shadow Tome to even make work. So Undead Resentment buffs undead, which does nothing for order. Unholy Champion, now this actually does help order, and let me explain why. By making this tome an order shadow tome, Unholy Champion now counts as a debuff spell that you can put the order orb on. So we now have another spell that will buff up a singular unit with 50% damage, undying, armor of despair. All enemies lose 10 morale, and then you put the order orb on it and they lose 10 morale, and then they also lose every single buff. So another split spell that you can put an order tome on to make go absolutely bonkers. Revenant Whispers gives you skeletons and demoralizes enemy. Order has no synergy other than Tyrant Knight, but Tyrant Knight you'd have to go undead, so you could do order undead, but then the question is like, why is you know what I mean? Then Summon Fallen Angel is also a debuffing unit made for Shadow. So I'm gonna call Tome of the Revenant like F tier in order, unless you're doing the undead order, at which point you're not doing pure order to begin with. But if you're doing like an order angels build, F tier. If you're doing like order Pyre Templars who are elementals, F tier. Like this is nothing for order. It's a shadow tome, which goes to the pure order tome, which I don't understand. Why is this pure order and then this is split? I guess for the theme, but like if you made Tome of the Archon order shadow, would be just as stupid. But anyway, let's talk about Tome of the Archon. Now, Tome of the Archon, I'm going to call an A tier tome, but it's mostly because it's a frustrating tome to fight, and probably for the developers has been a frustrating tome to balance. Why is that? Okay. So, we have Ascended Rebirth. Target dead non-hero and non-celestial unit revives as a vigil, and all friendlies get healed 20 hit points. It counts as a healing spell, so I believe that should be a buff spell for Fortune. A lot of combat casting, a lot of mana, but it is an antibody. I do believe it says, yeah, I believe you can revive enemies as a vigil as well. So this should be a decent enough spell if you have battle mages and you're trying to counter bodies. It's not amazing, but it's decent enough. I've never really seen anybody use it. I think I've seen it twice. It's okay. It counters bodies, and it's okay. Celestial Guardians. Target leader of an army gains Celestial Guardians for 1 world map turn. Conjuring 2 tier 2 Archon units at the start of the combat for a duration. This is a good way for builds with unlimited casting points to get Celestials in the battle. So maybe if you do Mystic Potential, you could cast this twice. Start with 4 tier 3 Archons. They're going to be, unfortunately, non-racial, so by this point in the game, they're already falling off. If you can get one with a bunch of combat enchantments you got, maybe it'll be decent. That's about it. So then, of course, we've got the 2 things here. Now, both of these are fine. One of them is obviously better than the other. Holy Aura is okay. Adjacent units get status resist. I think if you did this, you'd actually hit the status resist cap very easily, which really makes you question how good it is. It also does a mere 4 spirit damage to enemies, so it's fine, but it's not nearly enough damage to be worth it. If we compare this to Blessed Armor, like, it's just crazy how one-sided this is. I think if Holy Aura got buffed to 6 damage, maybe it would be good. But right now, I mean, come on. Holy Aura just gets blown out by Blessed Armors. It's just not even close. The only then big advantage of Tome of the Archon is Pure Soul. Now I'm going to call Tome of the Archon A tier literally only for Pure Soul, because Pure Soul is quite good. At the start of each turn in combat, dispel 1 negative status effect. If the negative status effect had a positive counter, create a positive status effect. Pure Soul affects your entire army, gives you cleanses the entire time, and is very, very annoying for enemies to deal with. Why is it so annoying, you're then asking? Because if you have 4 stacks of decay on an enemy, and it happens to target decay, they get 4 stacks of regeneration. So you end your turn decaying them, and you think, aha, now you're going to have to cleanse that, or you're going to not be able to heal. And then not only does it remove the decay, but it gives them 4 stacks of regeneration, so instead of taking 12 damage, they heal 24. Then it gets even worse, because then on your turn, you need to counter the decay with 4 stacks, or you need to counter the regeneration with decay, putting 4 decay on, then you need to get it 4 more decay. You would need 8 decay to counter the fact that it countered decay, which is very rough. Pure Soul can completely shut down counter builds, because if you're stacking, for example, Sunder Armor, and it cleanses Sunder Armor, now they have 5 armor. Now not only do you have to stack it again just to go negative, but you need to stack it 5 times just to break even at 0. So Pure Soul is very strong. It's also really cold Gloomstrider with Umbral Flesh. Or I should say Gloomstrider into question, because the Curse Eater effect removes a negative status effect and heals 10, disabled if burning. This one just does it forever. I think maybe they should give it a counter or something, like something extra you could stack on it. I don't know. It's just weird to me that, like, there's nothing you can do. The other effect, Curse Eater, was changed to have, I don't know if it was changed, it always had burning removed it, but now Pure Soul is just like, hey, you're screwed. Okay. So in total, Tome of the Archon, it's got Pure Soul. It's got some neat effects over here, not that big a deal. Now it's got the Astra. Now the Astra, I'm torn on. The Astra unit itself is not that strong. It's only a 7/6, 150 HP, so it's stat as if it's a ranged mythic, not a melee mythic, which is kind of weird. Radiant Strike is a mere 21 damage. Automatically condemns and inflicts burning, but 21 damage this late in the game, that's, I mean, it's a tier 5 mythic doing the damage of your average racial unit. So, Divine Sundering only hits in a 2 hex cone. The other ones are hitting in 3 hex cones, so it doesn't hit that many units. Automatically condemns, sunders defense, sunders resist. Condemned units get 20% more damage, but that's only 60 damage. AoE is fine, like it hits decently hard. But overall, I mean, compare this to like Fallen Angel or any of those other units, they blow it out of the water, right? Now, it does have Angelic Grace, a free action heal. It hits 2 hex radius, so it can be okay. Heals 20, gets a stack of grace. So Angelic Grace is like a fine free action ability, I guess. Like it's not the best, it's not the worst. It's free, right? It's a free heal. Okay, so then why would I say I'm torn on this unit? On its paper, on just the Astra itself, it's not really that great, right? So what is the Astra doing that we like? Archon leadership. While in the army, other celestial units gain led by the Archon. Led by the Archon gives all celestial units 10% damage and 2 resistance. Now that 2 resistance does help celestials shirk off their penalties, and it does help celestials actually be a good thing, because now they get 10% more damage. So the only problem is you need to put 1 unit in your army into it being an Astra, and then instead of going Tome of Prosperity, you need to go Tome of the Archon. I still think Tome of Prosperity is overall better. Tome of the Archon counters certain builds better for sure, but I would say Tome of Prosperity is overall better than Tome of the Archon. So it is weird that Celestials basically require a second tier 4 tome. So you have to get all the way to tier 4 to get Celestials. Then you need to be at your second tier 4 tome before Celestial is even that good. Unless flying counters your enemies, it takes a while for Celestials to get going. And then here's the problem. As you just saw with the Undead tier 4 tome, Undead end up being just stronger anyway. So, yeah. I think if Holy Aura was maybe a bit better, I think Holy Aura could definitely be changed to 6, maybe even 8 damage. But yeah. So this takes us to, of course, the weakest part of Order. Now, I was a bit conflicted on this one. And that's how I've been looking at my other monitor. I did ask people what I should rank the tier 5 tome. And I have gotten the answer that tier 5 tome, God Emperor, goes into F tier. Tome of the God Emperor is currently so bad that I would literally consider it better, stronger, more viable to take a 3rd tier 4 tome than to go for Tome of the God Emperor. I would literally consider it better if you're going an Order build to get Exaltation, Prosperity, and Archon than to get Tome of the God Emperor. Now, I know what you're saying. No, that's not true. That's impossible. But actually, if you look at the benefits, you'll see that it is true. Tome of the Archon is a 3rd tier 4 tome, will literally outperform Tome of the God Emperor. Even worse, Tome of Prosperity is a 3rd tier 4 tome, will blatantly outperform Tome of the God Emperor. Even in some situations where you're fighting a Giga Morale Bomb build and you somehow haven't gotten unlimited morale, Tome of Supremacy can be better. You want to know how bad it is, by the way? Tome of the God Emperor is Wrath of the God Emperor. Target enemy army suffers 20 spirit damage, becomes demoralized and condemned, and if cast in enemy territory, okay, so here's 120 world map points to condemn an enemy army at the start of the battle. Here's 80 world map points to condemn an enemy army at the start of the battle. Given the choice, you will use Condemn Army over Wrath of the Emperor, because you can condemn 2, maybe even 3 armies with the Tome of Supremacy. Additionally, because it lasts 5 turns, this allows you to condemn enemy armies earlier, potentially, and mess with their movement or make them take inefficient turns. So I think, personally, that's just better, okay? Tome of the God Emperor, so let's look at what it actually does here. Okay, number 1, Divine Protection. Units in the friendly army get Resurgence for 1 turn. Okay, so Resurgence means if you win the battle but a unit dies, it comes back to life. That's bad. At 200 world map casting, you're telling me instead of potentially casting Condemn Army 2.5 times, I'm going to cast Divine Protection? You know what the best way is to win a battle so your units don't die? You use Condemn Army instead of Divine Protection. The one saving grace of the tome is obviously Exalted Champion. Target friendly unit deals 100% more damage and gets 5 bolstered defense, resist, and status protection. Incredible. Unfortunately, even in this situation, Unholy Champion gives 50% damage, doesn't give the buffs, but causes a massive debuff AoE, removing their morale and removing all their buffs. Unholy Champion, if you're fighting buff stacked enemies, can literally end up doing about the same damage or more than Exalted Champion, which is odd, but Exalted Champion is good on its own. If you stripped enemies buffs or they don't have buffs, an Exalted Champion just goes kabam and you kill them, right? So it's pretty good. Now we run Divine Protection, bad. Wrath of the Emperor, bad. Mass Revive. How bad is Mass Revive, you might be asking? How bad could it really be? Target all friendly dead units with Faithful or Zeal. They come back to life with 50% of their total hit points. On surface you go, an AoE Revive? That's incredible. That's the best thing ever. That's actually half the tier 5 tomes have AoE Revive. Global Revive. And I'm not even joking. And this is the worst one by far. How bad is it, you might be saying? How bad could it really be that Mass Revive is that much weaker? So let's literally just go look at the Shadow one that's just right here. Battlefield Reanimation. Now this is 65 combat casting instead of 50, so it's a little bit more, but let's read it. All friendly undead units come back to life with 50% of their total hit points. Okay. Non-undead corpses come back to life as decaying zombies. Wait a minute. Battlefield Reanimation counters Tome of the God Emperor. So if one guy was to play undead and one guy was to play angels, the undead player could kill an angel and then use Battlefield Reanimation to make sure the body doesn't come back. Do you get the problem here? Given an infinite battle, one side will actually have the advantage on the other. Now you might say it's a souls cost. I agree, the souls cost is detrimental. But, well, Shadow also has death magic. Let's say you'd have to play Order with death magic, but Shadow is easier access to death magic because you have 10 affinity by this point. You'll obviously have it. But let's compare it to the last one, the best one, the strongest Mass Revive, Mass Rejuvenation. Now you're probably saying, okay, so one costs 50 casting points and heals everyone on my battle. Or sorry, revives everyone in my battle to 50%. Okay, so how good could Mass Rejuvenation be? The other one at least had the penalty of higher casting cost. Surely Mass Rejuvenation isn't literally just mine but better, right? 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 So Mass Rejuvenation. Heals all friendly units 40 temporary hit points. Brings all dead friendly animals and plants back to life with 50% of their total hit points. Uh-oh. Now, the only downside of Mass Rejuvenation, I'll admit, is that you have to be doing plant build. You can't be doing dragon. You can't be doing Naga, which is why literally nobody goes Naga or dragon, developers. That's why. Right there, that's why. But suffice it to say, if you are doing plant build versus celestial build, you will win 10 out of 10 times, and it's not even close. Literally just on the difference between your global reanimates alone. That's not even including that one side is Force of Nature, the other side is Exalted Champion. I have to cast Exalted Champion with my entire turn. That's a bit rough. So realistically, Tome of the God Emperor is an F tier tome. Compared to any other tier 5 tome, it might just straight up be the worst, if not for the Chaos tome. And even the Chaos tome has some advantages, right? But this, of course, leads us to the fact that it's just going to be better to do Prosperity, Exaltation, Archon. Literally every time. Prosperity, Exaltation, Archon. It's just so good, right? Even in the situation where you need to then, okay, fine, I've got all three of those. Now I can move on. Well, even in that situation, it might still be better then to go back and grab Prophecies or Sanctuary depending on what you missed. No, you'll be saying, no, it's not worse than a tier 5 tome. There's no way. But actually it is. Tome of the God Emperor is literally weaker than a tier 3 tome as a tier 5 tome. You know, there's no way, you'll say. Okay, so let's compare. Mass Revive and Exalted Champion. Tome of Sanctuary. Consecrated Domain. 2 resistance and 20 morale if you're starting a battle in your domain, so you basically can't be attacked. Anointed People and Keeper's Mark. Keeper's Mark basically means you can sit there and just chain heal people, chain regenerate people. Anointed People is 3 status, 3 spirit, so if you're ever fighting any spirit damage at all, this is quite annoying to deal with. But you're saying, okay, but I already took Tome of Sanctuary. Surely, well, Tome of Prophecies, remember, Prescient Circlets, your entire army will take a defensive stance on the first turn in battle. So if you're doing a shield build or if you're doing a tanky build, right, you're still in a situation with Tome of Prophecies where you're getting a very strong first turn of battle. Then you're also getting the fact that if a unit is hit into a steadfast from Tome of Sanctuary, you can then make it run away on your turn into a prescient circlet defense mode. That means an enemy not only needs to spend a unit running up to finish it off, but it needs to spend potentially 2 units running up to finish it off, because now it's got precognition again. Surely you see that literally just prescient circlets could probably actually outperform Tome of the God Emperor. I'm saying it's bad. I'm saying it's really, really bad. It's called Tome of the God Emperor, so a lot of people like going it. But at the end of the day, if Exalted Champion is not going to win you the battle, like if you've got some giga stacked up warrior level 20 with perfect tier 4 gear, in that situation Exalted Champion might be worth going. Yes, that's about it. Additionally, I just don't think that Mass Revive is reliable enough. It doesn't do anything other than revive, and you're maybe gonna have 2-3 units dead a turn, and a lot of times your enemies can just break the bodies. Breaking bodies, as you've seen, is not exactly a niche thing. It's not exactly an impossible thing to do. The idea that you're just going to have like 5, 6, 7 bodies on the ground isn't really how the game plays out unless you're fighting the AI. Now, if you are fighting the AI, sure, go for it. But if you're fighting the AI, then you can just prepare better to kill them with a tier 3 or tier 4 tome rather than Tome of the God Emperor. But the one exception, again, of Exalted Champion. Exalted Champion is the only thing saving this tone and making it a viable choice. So, with that all said, let's now go to my little list here, because I made a little list here so you guys could go to the end of the video and get some ideas. Okay, so Tome of Zeal. Tome of Zeal, because as I've said, it's just really good opener. Tome of Faith, because it's just a really good opener. Tome of Zeal gives you summon Zealot consistently turn 1. The Zealous workforce, fanatical workforce, the SPI skills to late game, and the enchantment it has, although it doesn't work on a lot of builds, as I've explained, it's just a really good enchantment. Tome of Faith, because in early research SPI is strong, a strong summon, strong scaling for your support units. Tome of Faith, just really good overall. Tome of Construct is outrageously good at scaling, and it's still pretty good right when you get it. So Tome of the Construct is again another S tier. I think if they redo the affinity tree, Order might become a problem. If they actually get good affinities. The biggest problem with Order is, although they have really good tomes, they have really bad affinity trees. So there's not much to spend your Imperium on, because you just don't really have any good affinity things. Cleansing Flame, as I've joked, it got nerfed, so it went from S tier to S tier. Big shame. It's got Pyre Templars. That's it. It's got Pyre Templars. That's all it needs to have. Tome of Prophecies against Charge, I think, is S tier. It basically destroys Charge, and yeah. Tome of Prophecies is really good. Tome of Inquisition, because it has the Inquisitor, who as a tier 3, it is straight up the best tier 3 unit in the game, and unless you let your opponents get to late game, I think it's going to be generally the best unit in the entire game. So Tome of Inquisition is just really good. Tome of Sanctuary, as I've explained, you basically stop enemies from being able to attack into you. They can't really do it anymore, and even in the field, you're getting the Spirit Resist, Status Resist, Steadfast. So it's quite frustrating for enemies to deal with. Just the advantage that nobody can try to attack you because your Sanctuary spell, your Consecrated Domain, is going to be so strong. It's rough. It's rough. Okay. Then there's Tome of Prosperity, which I've explained. You get that Grace every turn. You get the Resistance every turn. It's just really strong for keeping your melee alive. And then if you want to go with the Prosperity Dragons as well in your stacks, they're just really good at keeping your units kind of stripped free of debuffs. If you combo Prosperity with anything else, it can get really difficult for enemies to even keep your units debuffed at all. Tome of Archon, because Pure Soul, if Pure Soul hits things that are bad for your enemy, it's so frustrating to fight against. And it is one of those tomes where you kind of have to stack a lot of throwaway debuffs to try to bypass, because it will only cleanse one thing at random per turn. So you can try to get Pure Soul to cleanse bad things, but if it ever cleanses, again, Decay from Blades of Decay, then you are screwed because you can't do anything. If it ever cleanses Sunder Armor from a Sunder Armor build, once again, you're screwed. There's nothing you can do. Tome of Discipline, I like a little bit more lately. Tome of Discipline has some advantages for sure, but overall, it's like a B tier. I would actually, realistically, I think it's still like a C tier tome. I think in all honesty, calling it a C tier tome is the best way to go about it. It works in some builds, but it's just not working overall. I think C tier is a bit more fair for it because some of these are actually like not bad, and so putting it with these tomes feels a bit Okay, so Tome of Subjugation. Now, Tome of Subjugation is definitely worse than Cleansing Flame. Cleansing Flame is just way better for a tome that gives a tier 4 unit. But the Tyrant Knight got buffed. He's pretty strong. Subjugating Raid is still a strong siege project. You just slap that on every free city you push through, every undefended player you push through. That's just going to buff up your cities and make them stronger at no cost. Technically, the cities you conquer are weaker, but like, who cares? Tome of Supremacy. The Exemplar is really strong. The global spell is really strong. It can buff up your support units to hit a little bit harder as well. And it does give you some kind of soft counters to revive builds. So builds that otherwise have no counterplay can do something about it. Tome of Exaltation, I also put in B tier. It's maybe more of an A tier tome. Maybe I should put it in A tier. But I definitely don't think it's on the power of these tomes. It's here because it unlocks the Shrine of Smiting for Shadowblade builds. So you go Tome of Shades, you get Shadowblades. Shrine of Smiting auto blinds everybody, letting you crush them. Gives you the Angel Transformation if you're going to go Archon. Gives you Angel Transformation if you're fighting a ranged army that you just want to ignore all zone of control and get in there. It does give you that really good SPI. Your ruler can only stay dead on the turn he was killed. The very next turn he's coming back to life. That's pretty strong for sure. Yeah. Virtue, I don't think Virtue does enough. I think if its building was changed to maybe generate a knowledge, like maybe just generated 10 knowledge, the tome would be better, but even then, I'm not even sure. And that would, knowledge creep is a problem, but the problem is the tomes that do generate knowledge. And to be fair, they did just buff Tome of Scrying with more knowledge. So that was odd. Otherwise, I think Tome of Virtue has a problem with trying to buff racial units, give you a non-racial unit, give you a strong shield unit, but now you're in a tier 2 tome with a shield unit. We could be getting a racial shield unit. You could be going feudal or even industrious and using their racial shield unit, and that will end up actually being better than getting paladin because that racial shield unit will then be buffed up by another tome of buffs. Tome of the Beacon, Mighty Meek is definitely very strong, but the tome as a whole is just all over the place. It's giving you a buff for tier 1 and tier 2 units, then giving you a summon for a tier 3 unit, then giving you a racial tier 3 unit. Then it's giving you a combat spell for healing, and then it's giving you a buff for your vassals. Some of the beacons just all over the place. It just feels like they just glooped together a bunch of concepts that didn't really have any synergy with each other. Tome of Prophecies against non-charging enemies is bad. I think, in all honesty, I need to move this down to D tier. It's not maybe that bad, but ugh. If you're fighting non-charge enemies, I just don't think there's basically any way that this ends up being a winning tome. It certainly can be strong against charge. It can certainly be strong against heroes and things that are maybe annoying, but you can just easily set it up as well. And then once you set it up, you don't really have any problems, right? And I think, I definitely think one of the problems with Tome of Prophecies is you're skipping one of these strong tier 3 tomes. So instead of going, for example, if you were to go, Cleansing Flame Sanctuary, just as one example, and another guy went Cleansing Flame Prophecies, the Sanctuary player would absolutely destroy him. I mean, he wouldn't do more damage for sure, but just in effect, he would destroy him, especially because they basically have the same SPI as each other. That gives the advantage, in my opinion, to Sanctuary. If Prophecies is strong, it's because you're using defense mode spam on Tome of the Construct. And in that mode, I think it's good. But just as a generic tome to just pick out of nowhere, it's not good for battle mages. It's not good for supports. It's only good for defense mode spam from Tome of the Constructs. Tome of the Revenant, I think in order builds is F tier. I should just specify that entirely. does absolutely nothing for you, obviously. I think a lot of people have looked at it and they've probably been confused. I don't even know why it's an order tome. The only thing I can think of is... The only thing I can think of is they wanted you to be able to go Tome of Transformation into Tome of the Revenant. But Tome of Transformation is already... You need 3 Shadow Affinity. Then you get to 5 with it. So you would need to perfectly not need Shadow. You need to be 5 Shadow, 1 Order. And then you could go Revenant. It's very confusing to me why it's even Order. It has nothing to do with Order. And worse up, the fact that it is in Order lets it use the Order Orb, which just makes it quite frustrating to deal with. And then, of course, we have Tome of the God Emperor. Tome of the God Emperor is just bad at everything. I legitimately think it is better most times to go with a tier 3 or tier 4 tome than to go with the God Emperor. You could argue that it's stronger than a tier 3 tome just because you're doubling your hero damage. But even then, I'm like, eh... So Tome of the God Emperor is just weak and everything it does. It's not very good. So I think this is a fair tier list, realistically speaking. So that's everything I got. Leave a comment on any of your thoughts. Leave a comment on anything you think I did wrong, right, etc. You have a different opinion. You did a different build using a tome that you think is good. Anything at all. It's all helpful to me to help me do more videos and stuff like that. So thank you all for watching. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, everybody. Once again, make sure to like, make sure to subscribe. And as always, have a great rest of your day, everyone. Goodbye.